Museum Awards, moving away from Best of the Web at our 20th anniversary conference in 2016. And we cover more than just the web, of course. Innovation in terms of all sorts of network technologies, video, and other sorts of just innovative practices. So I can kind of show you what these look like. You all might recognize this lady, Rosanna Flutie, getting an award in 2016 at our 20th anniversary conference for work that she did at the Broad Art Museum. And we changed up our process a lot last year thanks to the work of Jane Alexander and Stephen Beasley. And you can see them here with all of the awardees from last year. So this is something that I just did want to mention because I have seen during this conference how much innovative work is going on in this community, and we would love to have your projects nominated and recognized at our conference, and of course have you join us if you are able to. One of the things that distinguishes museums in the web is that we require almost every single person who presents in the conference to write a paper about their project, their presentation. Now, we don't allow them to read those papers at the podium during the conference. Instead, the presentations and the papers are very different things, and the papers are all put freely online. As you can see, we've got 1,248 papers online now. They've been free and available since 1997. We've been slowly growing the archive, and you know, you can pretty much search for anything. Does somebody want to give me a term to search on, see what we've got in the archives? Gallery 1. I'm sure there's nothing on that. Let's see. All right, so here we go. We've got Transforming the Art Museum Experience, the first year, the reception of Gallery 1. Yes, we have quite a bit on Gallery 1 online, but not just, you know, kind of the major, well-known, world-renowned projects, but also smaller projects from smaller institutions all around the world. So this really is a resource for kind of investigating what is the leading edge today in cultural heritage practice, but also how that practice is transformed over time. And in 2016, we had a team of volunteer editors go back through the 20 years of the archives and choose one paper from each year that they considered kind of the best or the most salient, the most resonant for today paper from that year. And so we've got 2020, hindsight is 2020 for our 20th anniversary. And so it's kind of an interesting way to go back and watch how things like concepts of collections management or content management or indeed augmented reality have actually been around for a very long time and how they've evolved over the decades. Right. So the other thing that we try to do at the conference to inspire digital practice today is we have an exhibition called MWX, and we invite digital artists and practitioners who are using digital tools in ways that might be out of the ordinary to present their work in an exhibit hall at the conference. And so there again, it was so helpful for me to hear all of the wonderful projects presented here at this conference, and I'd love to talk to anybody who might be interested in being part of our MWX exhibitions going forward. We also launched last year, so one of the things that we recognize as kind of an issue with conferences is it's so easy for them to be one-hit wonders. You go, you're blown away, it's so wonderful, you have all these great ideas, and Monday morning you go back to the office and you're back into that daily grind, and it's kind of like, where did all of that go? So we launched Communities of Practice, which we started out with just 3 themes: accessibility, immersive storytelling, and online collections. And this enables people who gather at the conference and others who weren't able to attend in person to continue working and collaborating online and through other means, including in-person meetings locally if they care to, on particular topics. So this might be something else that could be of interest to you all. And also on our wiki, we have some case studies of major projects, including both Cooper Hewitt's Pen Project and Gallery 1. So you can read quite extensive documentation about those projects there as well as in our archives. Now, the other big thing that we did in our 20th anniversary was we decided that we wanted to move from being just a conference to present innovation to also helping to support and catalyze some of that innovation in the field. So we created the MuseWeb Foundation with the explicit aim of supporting projects that help really transform the business of culture. My personal feeling, and I think this is widely shared, is that the business models that are largely sustaining museums and other cultural institutions right now are really not going to last very much longer. You know, maybe we'll make it another generation, but we need to find new ways of both supporting cultural practice, but also making cultural discourse more inclusive. So that's really the focus of the MuseWeb Foundation. And we started with our flagship project is called Be Here. It is a place-based storytelling project that invites people from communities and also works with museums in communities to share their cultural stories about the history, the art, the memories, the places that are important to those communities. And we started out from a technological point of view very, very simply, just collecting kind of mobile walking tour stories. We piloted the project in Baltimore. And let's see how we're doing. Okay. Are we okay on time so far? All right. I'm just going to play a little clip. Hang on. I have a shorter version. Sorry, I was about to. The version online is about 7 minutes, but I do have a shorter version that I think I can play you here. And these stories were really recognizing that there's an awful lot of cultural knowledge that resides in our communities, that you know, the curators and the subject matter specialists of cultural institutions, as learned and as expert as they are, can't possibly have time to cover everything. So if we really want an inclusive cultural record, we have to find ways of adding new voices. So this is a little video that
During the Be Here Baltimore pilot, we funded local creators, museums, and neighborhood organizations to tell the story of Baltimore in their own words. Some decided to tell their stories with video.
My name is Janice Curtis Green, storyteller and proud Black Baltimorean. And let me tell you about my city. The Orchard Street Church is the oldest still standing structure in Baltimore, constructed by and for African Americans.
If you look at the intersection of Northway and York Road, you'll notice two things. First, a large stone wall that reaches north to Old Cold Spring Lane and south almost to 42nd Street. Second, you'll notice a one-way sign leading out of the community. Both of these designs were created for the specific reason to keep people out.
Everyone's Place African Culture Center is one of 54 Black-owned bookstores remaining in the United States. They have been in business for 30 years. If you want to be in a place that smells so good, come here.
At this house on 108 Montgomery Street was a funeral home founded by Roland Brown's father. But plans for an extension of I-95 through Sharp-Leadenhall and over Baltimore's Inner Harbor meant that all the homes on the street were slated for demolition. All the residents were forced to leave, and even after the plans for the interstate extension were scrapped in the mid-1970s, the homes remained derelict. In the late 1970s, however, as part of the Dollar Homes program under then-Mayor William Donald Schaefer, the residences were auctioned off, and miraculously, Roland Brown was able to purchase the home he had grown up in, an option not available to most of the displaced residents of Sharp-Leadenhall, who lacked the requisite credit to qualify for the housing program.
In 1921, U.B. Blake and Noble Sissel joined forces with the vaudeville comedy duo Florinee Miller and Aubrey Lyles to write a Broadway musical, Shuffle Along. When the all-black musical and cast premiered in May of 1921 at an obscure New York theater, it forever transformed the Great White Way's bright lights.
We even had a local storytelling organization take their live stories and geolocate them on the app.
It was raining and it was raw, and my daughter was at a music lesson, and I needed a place to keep out of the weather, so I decided to drop into the Walters Art Museum here in Mount Vernon. And what I saw there really changed my life. I was wandering around the galleries, and I ended up in the ancient Roman portrait room. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with ancient Roman portraits, they're a lot like decapitated heads. The Walters did something rather unusual. They set many of their best portraits squarely out in the middle of the room where you can see them from all angles, kind of like a cocktail party. So I got to see the back of the heads for once, and I absolutely fell in love with the hairstyle on this dead chick named Julia Domna.
And we'll leave you with this one last quote that encapsulates the whole idea of the Be Here project.
I feel like everything's art, and everything can tell you a story, so I kind of just suck it in wherever.
Okay. So I realized that by playing it from my drive, you didn't get the captions, and I apologize to our translators. If you'd like to go back and listen more closely to a longer version, you can get it on the MuseWeb website. So this project, in a little over 2 months, gathered 240 stories of Baltimore, and it was supported at the launch with sponsorship from a mobile company that has an app called Easy Travel, IZI.travel. And we were really interested to see that, first of all, the people who came forward and contributed were incredibly representative of the city and the diversity of its communities in terms of ethnicity and background and education. And I was pleasantly surprised because, I don't come from a background that's terribly representative of Baltimore, and I was kind of leading this project, and I was a little bit afraid, frankly, that the participants would look a lot like me. Which is, I think, a problem that a lot of museums face. They are run by mainly white middle-class women, and they're attended mainly by white middle-class women, at least in the U.S. But there's something about storytelling that seems to make everybody feel that they have something to say, and they came forward in again, great numbers and diversity. The contributions continued, and 1 year later, we had 1,240 stories that had been contributed, and all of these are geolocated around the city. Now, that project led me to get in touch with and get to know better the Peel Center for Baltimore History and Culture. So I'm going to give a little bit of a history lesson here. So the Peel Center is actually the oldest museum building in the United States. It was purpose-built in 1814 by Rembrandt Peale to be a museum, the first building that was ever explicitly constructed with that aim. And it shut down in 1997, and it's been basically vacant for the past 20 years. But a group of really passionate and committed individuals have come together to raise funds to renovate the building and reopen it. But they were being asked, understandably, what are you going to do with this building? And so we realized that actually it'd be a great platform, a great home for this storytelling project. The Peel Center aims to be a new kind of a museum, a center for Baltimore history and architecture, and a center for Baltimore history and architecture as told through the authentic stories of the people who live there and who experience those places. So let me give you a little glimpse of the building. So this is the founder, Rembrandt Peale. He was the son of Charles Willson Peale, who was kind of the patriarch of the first family of American art at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century. Charles Willson, you may have seen in this kind of famous painting, a portrait of the artist in his museum, had himself founded a museum in Philadelphia and the first art academy there. He required, I suppose, all of his children, and 13 survived to adulthood, to be artists. They were all quite talented, but they were also natural historians, did a lot of traveling and collecting specimens, exhibiting these specimens in their museums, and they were also innovators and entrepreneurs. So one of the interesting things that Rembrandt Peale did when he opened his museum in Baltimore. He intended to run it as a business, that is to say, to keep it open and pay back the investors who'd helped fund the building of the museum through admission fees for tickets. And he had a secret weapon in getting people in the doors. He introduced gaslight in his galleries, which allowed him to keep the galleries open in the evening and sell more tickets. Well, it turned out that this gaslight business took off, and he got the contract by 1817 to provide gas throughout the streetlights of Baltimore. They say that people would stand outside the museum in the street, kind of their mouths open, aghast at the brilliance of the light coming through, because this was really a spectacular new thing. They'd never seen that kind of brilliance of light and that technology used before. He manufactured the gas in a little shed. You can see the kind of red brick building there is the Peale. This is a reconstruction by UMBC, the University of Baltimore, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. It's a fabulous online 3D reconstruction of the city around 1815. And so you can see the Peale there, and just behind that red brick building, you've got a sort of a building with a little cupola on top. That's the picture gallery. And behind that, next to the church, is the shed where the gas was manufactured. I don't know, Josie, how conservators today would feel about having gas manufactured behind the museum, but fortunately they didn't really know how to compress it then, so it would occasionally catch fire in the wooden hollowed-out logs that were the pipes that piped it throughout the city, but it never exploded. So fortunately today, the company that Peale founded is still existing. It's 200 years old this year, BGE, Baltimore Gas and Electric, and they are actually helping us restore and renovate the gas lights and return them to the Peale. And so this is the work of the wonderful Steve Pedri and friends. Right, so I see I'm getting close to the end. So this is kind of the background of the Peale, but where are we going forward? Our mission really is to help people see Baltimore in a new light. I don't know if you're familiar with Baltimore, but it's a city that is known for a very small number of narratives, most of them not very positive. And that's just not really representative of the wealth of the history and the culture and the creativity that's in the city. So with the Baltimore Stories Project based here, we've introduced a new home, a physical home in a prestigious historic building for these voices, for these diverse stories of the city. And as we go forward and the building is renovated, we intend to have a media makerspace so that we can support these storytellers in not just recording and publishing their stories on mobile apps and on the web, but also to make AR and VR experiences or documentary film or indeed traditional exhibitions as well. One of the projects that contributed to Be Here Baltimore is called Promenade. And this is a wonderful immersive theater experience that happened this past summer in a bus, and you take a tour of Baltimore. And I'll just play you a very small sample of what these voices sound like.
My name is Henry Sorrell. They used to call me, and they still do, Smiley. This used to be my patrol beat for Northwest District, 4700 block of Liberty Heights. Matter of fact, when it first started out back in the 60s, we used to walk the beat back and forth. Matter of fact, they didn't allow us to have cars because they didn't have any. And I walked the whole area from all the way down Northern Parkway, all the way back up to Garrison Boulevard, which is a long way on both sides of the streets, and sometimes 2 and 3 streets in, if a call came out, because it was a call box right on the corner of Garrison and Liberty Heights. That it was the only communication we had. You didn't have anything called radio back then.
I have tried to put mainly native plants here, switchgrasses and goldenrods and baptisia, and then this is called a cup plant. Jennifer Sherlock Hilton and 635 Deep Dean Road. from the upstairs room of my daughter, Sylvie, she can see this is the trumpet vine, and she overlooks her window. And from the kitchen, you have these big trumpets, and the hummingbirds come, right? And you can get this close-up view of them. It's really amazing. They're like little jewels, and they move so fast. And once in a while, they'll land on one of these branches, and you get to see them still, which is something. We might see one if we sit here.
When Freddie Gray died, that's the only time I saw Baltimore united. Other than that, it's always positive stuff going in Baltimore, but you don't hear about it. So you only know what you hear. Like every day you hear someone was murdered. You know, you don't hear about the peaceful stuff going on maybe in Charles Village or down in the harbor, unless there's something trying to gain money for the city.
Also, when you bring people together, you know, people all want the same thing. What we discover when we do a coalition effort is that everyone wants to live in the safest neighborhood they can. They want to have a good school to send their kid to. They want to be able to hang out on their porch. And what you see over and over again is like the differences between people really go away when you're doing organizing work, because you hear the same thing in Roland Park as you hear in Penn Lucy, as you would hear in the Barclay neighborhood, or over in Collington Square in East Baltimore. Because people all do want
that you are the total sum of your experiences. I like motorcycles because I rode motorcycles and they were great. I'm sorry, better example. I can't stand Volkswagens because every Volkswagen I had broke down. Well, that's your experience. I got Volkswagens and they all gave me 250,000 miles. You know what I mean? I can't stand white people because white people is prejudiced and racist. Well, I got white people in my wedding because they are loving and kind, right? The total sum of your experiences or the lack thereof. So whatever you experience will create your reality.
I would say I've never been metaphorically lost, spiritually lost. I really love Baltimore. You know, I viewed it as when I moved here is that I now have the ability, the possibility of exploring a new city.
I want to correct myself there. Actually, the very first sample that you heard was from a wonderful podcast series called Out of the Blocks, done by the local NPR radio station called WYPR, Aaron Henkin and Wendell Patrick. And so that features original music by Wendell Patrick. And what they do is they interview everyone in one square block of the city and make an hour-long podcast out of all of those voices. And so if you want to get to know Baltimore, I highly recommend that podcast and also The Rise of Charm City. So I need to wrap up now. And if you want to hear more of the stories of Baltimore, I left some postcards like these out on the front desk as well. So you can access the various platforms that we put all of those stories on. And there's also a little brochure about the Peel. But just a couple of things to leave you with. One of the things that we're trying to do as we think about the experience of these voices is, going back to something that was said on the first day, immersion first, how to make them immersive. So that last sample that you heard is from the Be Here Stories app, which is more, it's less like an audio walking tour and more like a cultural radio station where you just turn it on, put it in your pocket, and then as you move around the city, those voices and those stories come to you according to the location that you're at. And it's something that's been used a lot by students and professors at the various universities in Baltimore who want to get their students off campus interviewing the local residents and creating walking tours out of it. And you can see there's quite a diversity of different tours, including things like slow violence in Baltimore, food deserts, different ways of viewing the city. So what we're trying to do here is move from being just a production house of culture, just a treasure house of culture, to being a production house of culture, a place where we're not just conserving and presenting history and culture, but we're helping write the history and the culture of the future with the authentic voices of the people of Baltimore. So that's kind of our approach. It is like drinking from Niagara Falls because this is a startup and a very small team trying to do an awful lot. But again, I'd be very interested to have your thoughts and your input and also your questions about how we're going to hopefully make this work.
Muchas gracias, Nancy. Bueno, pues ahora vamos a comenzar con la intervención de Elizabeth Neely, de la American Alliance of Museums en Washington, D.C. Liz Neely es una apasionada defensora de cómo la creatividad y la creación empoderan y enriquecen nuestras vidas. Va a ir de eso la plática que van a escuchar. Ella cree que los museos están perfectamente posicionados en nuestras comunidades locales y globales para inspirar una mentalidad de aprendizaje permanente alimentada por la curiosidad. Ha trabajado muchos años en museos, como directora de experiencia digital en el Art Institute of Chicago, como curadora interina en el Harvard Museum of Art en Taos, Nuevo México, y como consultora de estrategia digital. Como profesional activa en la comunidad de museos, Liz fue presidenta del MCN en 2015, una organización que promueve la transformación digital en el sector cultural y forma parte de la dirigente del New Media Consortium, los editores de Horizon Report. Liz fue la oradora principal de la conferencia de verano 2015 en el NMC y en 2013 presentó una charla de TED Talks llamada Inventing Fabulation sobre su filosofía de cómo hacer cosas ridículas puede hacer nuestro mundo. Tiene un MBA de la estimada Kellogg School of Management de la Northwest University y actualmente trabaja para avanzar en el campo de los museos como directora senior de Integrated Content en la Alianza Americana de Museos. Ya podemos comenzar. Gracias, Liz.
Sorry, it's too long. I have to sigh. Oh, gosh. All right, looks like we're still working on Hola, buenos días. Yo tampoco no puedo hablar en español por la presentación. You'd be really annoyed by me in about 10 minutes. But I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for inviting us. Thank you very much. It's great to be here in Mexico City. The last time I was in Mexico City was, we won't give the date, was 1988. So it's really great to be here. So I am, as Monica said, I'm with the American Alliance of Museums. So my presentation might be a little bit different because I'm really coming at it. My whole job is looking at now is about what other museums are doing, and that I really want to celebrate what other museums are doing and help and support what's going on in the field. And American Alliance of Museums is an association that supports museums across the world, mainly in the United States. We have 30,000 members. And we are the accrediting institution that says you're doing what you're supposed to do in a museum. And of those 30,000 members, about 80% of them have 10 staff or fewer. So I also have and it's the full range. So everything from a zoo to an aquarium to an art museum, historical sites are a big one. So it's something that I'm also really, once I've been working there and realized that the vast majority of museums in the States and probably around the world are very small and don't have a ton of resources. So it's really important that we all work together and that we hear about these big projects, and then we also think about what is the creativity and ingenuity that we can use in also smaller museums or learning from each other for more maybe DIY and scrappy things. So that being said, what I'm going to talk, you're going to see a lot of examples, and they're not examples that I was involved with the projects. I'm bringing out examples that kind of tell the story, but I'm not taking credit for all of these things. So I just wanted to point that out because we have talked to a lot of people that are doing their own projects. So I was asked to, because I've been involved in a lot of projects that are involved with learning and education at all ages. So for youth, for lifelong learning and that kind of thing. and how technology has helped that. And my thinking has changed a lot about this in the last 6 months or so, or maybe we could say year and a day or so, since everything has fallen apart. But anyway, we're not going to talk about politics. So what I was really thinking about is what is the ideal place for museums in the overall learning ecosystem? And this has kind of been on my mind for a while, since, as Monica mentioned, I'm really passionate about the maker movement and creativity and everything, and did a lot of work with that at the Art Institute. But if we zoom out, like museums and education and learning, like if we zoom out, well, okay, what is our ideal position as museums vis-a-vis the formal and informal learning system? And then when you think about and you zoom out to the galaxy phase of that, it's like, okay, well, doesn't that actually ask us what the role of museums in society is? So I think that's really what I've been thinking a lot about lately. And let's see what's next here. And I think that there are a lot of people thinking about this. So this is a quote actually from Nina Simon, who you might be familiar with. The picture is from this year when she was speaking in Columbia, but I think this quote was a good one. It's actually from 2012, so she's been thinking about it for a while. How do museums ensure that people don't experience museums as merely warehouses and mausoleums? So how do we continue to be relevant and actually be part of society? And I think that that's part of the learning ecosystem. So, but I think that that's actually the opportunity, right? That's the great opportunity that we have when we see what's going on in the world. Formal education systems, at least in the United States. I can't speak for what's happening here, but I'd love to hear. It's, moving them is very slow, and changing how we learn is very slow, and it's actually moved more towards standards and rules and testing, and you just see that it's got this kind of rules-based thing. Whereas we in museums actually have this like storehouse of like things to go off of ideas and everything, and we don't have the rules that they have in the formal education. So how do we take that and really turn it into this great opportunity of teaching humans how to be better humans? Because that's kind of what we need right now, is that we've got rules and we've got, standards and everything, but there isn't a standard for how to be an empathetic human. There isn't a standard for, how I'm supposed to treat you as a fellow human if you don't look like I look, or how to understand you if we don't come from the same background. There's not a standard for that. So how can we as museums actually actuate that? And I think that's a really exciting possibility. And I'm just bringing up this because I get the opportunity, since I'm an association, I get the opportunity to go to a lot of conferences, which is lovely. And I was just at the MCN conference last week. I think you were there too, Nancy. Actually, the front row might have been there. This was Jamil Smith along with Adrian Russell and Aaliyah Brown, where they co-keynoted. So the three of them are very active in how we are looking at diversifying museums from a very strong and basically decentering whiteness in the U.S. museums. And it was great because it was three of them. It was a discussion. It was really nice to kind of break up but anyway, one of the things that Jamil Smith is actually also not a museum person. He's a journalist who mainly writes with the LA Times right now. And one of the things that he said that really spoke to me, because I was thinking about this, is that museums help us understand the human condition. And at least it has the possibilities of that. We all know that there are problems, and we'll get to that as well. But this is the opportunity. And I didn't get to go to this conference, but there was a conference in Medellin, Colombia, which AAM put on with TIPA from Argentina and Parque Explora out of Medellin. Looked amazing, and there was a big thread through it about why be a brave museum. And I know this is hard to read, but I wanted the people. So it's got Andres Roldan from Parque Explora, Kaywin Feldman from Mia, who's also been very active in a lot of these things, and like thinking about, because we as museums value gender equality, diversity, social justice, or at least I think we can all agree that we value this, scientific research, education, freedom of speech. So because we value these things, how do we use these things, again, to be part of the learning ecosystem that is about being better humans? And I just want to bring up another example, and I'm actually going to read a quote from this. Tony Butler out of the Derby Museums in the UK. Has anyone heard of him? So, amazing thinker. So he's part of the Happy Museum Project, and basically on the blog wrote, if not here, where? The museums as hosts in a polarizing world, because again, we know in the a lot of places in the world right now, it's really, we're getting into our own boxes, and empathy is really an issue. We're just like getting into only people that we know or we're like, and not getting out. So polarized, that's what the word is. And I'm going to read actually a couple things here. So this is off of the blog. Because he can say it better than I can, and amidst this polarization, museums have a significant role to play. Museums enjoy high levels of public trust still. Through our collections and programs, we can take the long view and history, exploring the complex identities of local, national, and global citizenship. Museums can be the bridge between opposing value systems, exploring difference, but promoting those qualities humans have in common. And I have even more from Tony Butler, because it's that good. Museums are essentially social spaces where people of all sorts can congregate. They are not neutral spaces, and I think that we've been hearing a lot more about this too. What is the idea of neutrality? They are not neutral spaces, nor can they absolve themselves from the complicity of colonialism or embedding privilege. This can, however, act as a starting point and stand for values which are non-negotiable, such as religious tolerance, respect for the rule of law, the rights of minorities. So there are certain things that are non-negotiables, but there are other things that we need to dive into, and the museum isn't always right. And I love hearing from Nancy, because getting different stories and allowing for that complexity, allowing for that mess, because that's also something as humans, at least from what I view, is we're kind of missing. We have to be okay with dealing with mess, with being uncomfortable at times, and that kind of thing. So how do we activate our museums to help people practice these kinds of things? The empathy, dialogue, complexity, creativity, inclusion, bravery. And I know I don't have a lot of pictures of kids in this, but this is all ages, right? For kids, for youth programs, for adults, for every program that we put together. What came up at the MCN keynote also is that every single program that we're doing, we're making a choice, right? And we all know that because we do programs. And everything we have to come back, think about our values, think about where are we positioning ourselves within our communities, within our ecosystems of learning, and how are we dealing with things like this. And it's always something that we should always recheck and just really question every single time, because that's how we're going to get better at being better humans. And if we don't do it, we'll either become irrelevant or it's going to come to us, right? So either we're not part of this dialogue or the dialogue will come to us. And I don't know if anyone here heard, but this terrible thing and this has happened several times on the National Mall in the U.S., and this is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which it just opened a little over a year ago, has been an amazing pilgrimage for African Americans, and is an amazing museum for everyone. And several times a noose has been found, which noose is something that in the United States was used to oppress African Americans, luckily a long time ago, not that long ago though. And one of the things that the founding director, Lonnie Bunch, wrote an op-ed, an opinion piece for the New York Times, basically saying this is why this museum exists, and this is why museums exist. Not so that a noose can be found there, but so that we can start having discussions about this, so that we get beyond this. Why is that even showing up? So that we can like learn how to deal with situations like this and hopefully not deal with this at all. So if it doesn't happen, if we don't deal with it, it will come to us. So so how are we going to adapt to change to these times and be part of this? This is a graphic that it's from a little a photocopy that a teacher scanned and put on the internet, and it's for application for where it's a lesson for kids called Imaginary Adaptations, and it's talking about evolution. And so basically, the kids are asked to make an adaptation, or actually look at the adaptation on this and think about, well, why did this turtle grow horns? And then the kid has to make up what they adapted to. Well, they needed to get into a Cheetos bag or something, and so they needed horns to open it, or something like that. So I think that this is something that we can kind of launch off as a thought piece, too, to think about, like, well, how do we need to adapt? What will we as museums look like in 20 years from now, so that we are a vital part, that we continue to be a vital part of being human? Okay, so that has nothing to do with technology. That's just who we are, philosophy, high-minded, hopefully high-minded. And, but, we're at a technology conference. So where does museum technology fit in? And science, beautiful technology. I love history. The way, actually, I'll stay on this one. I think that, and we've heard a lot of discussion in the last 2 days on this, because technology is not a magic bullet for anything. Technology has a lot of problems, just like everything else that we have. It's just like with our programs, just like everything. We always have to be asking, are we thinking through all of these very complex issues that come with it? Privacy, whose voice are we taking, who has access, and that kind of thing. But I think that it's also because technology has become such a vital part of our everyone's society, is that we have to also figure out how to use it in meaningful ways. And also, when we as museums use it in meaningful and in growing and good and thoughtful ways, that I also think that, and I think this actually came up earlier in the conference, that it gives us also a digital literacy, even as part of it, of how to use technology properly within our society. So I just have a few examples of that ways that I think that technology was used. And this was hard to pick because there are a lot of examples. And then I put on Twitter asking for examples, and people got all over it. So I will put together a whole list and share it with this hashtags of everything, because I didn't even get a maker one in here, because maker stuff was used twice yesterday, and Jane doesn't like it. Just kidding. We're joking. No good. So I just wanted to bring up a few examples that I think are really good at looking at this. So this is the portal from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and this basically, let me see if this is a shipping container that was in an exhibition there. The exhibition was about anti-genocide. That wasn't the name of it. It was more complex than that. But it really, it connected people, visitors, that went inside of this shipping container with real human beings somewhere else that, I think I have the, real human beings somewhere else that had fled Syria and were refugees now. So how do you talk about these things? So you could actually sit down and talk with people. So I'm going to take the people's words that were from there. This is Nancy Gillette and Jackie Scutardi. I don't know if I'm saying that right, who we did a blog post on the Center of Future Museums blog, which is part of AAM. We chose this technology to put people face-to-face in an intimate setting, a repurposed shipping container, and encourage conversation as a way of breaking down barriers and opening our ears, minds, and hearts, and to give voice to many who we have only heard about in the news, which we hear terrible things in the news all the time. How do we humanize it? How do we start building empathy, dialogue, all kinds of things like that? This is another view of that. I just think it's, this is actually simple technology, it's kind of simple, but then they, putting it together, and that was the hard part, so as far as getting people on that end. So you can read all about that. And this is a reflection from a museum visitor. Speaking and connecting in real time makes quite clear my responsibility to do something, to share, to speak up, to give assistance, to speak truth to power, to challenge stereotypes, to act on my own values. Don't get better than that. That's pretty good. Oh my goodness, it goes by so fast. Okay, so that's okay. So I want on a completely different kind of topic, because I think there are so many threads that we could go down, is actually got to experience this in real life last week. Warhol for All, it's a comprehensive program of different ways that the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, as part of the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh, is kind of making programs that are more accessible to people with disabilities. And particularly, I liked this one that is it's a guided, so we've seen tactiles, but this is a guided tactile tour, so it's multi-sensory. It guides you through it, so that when you touch the tactile of a Warhol piece, it's telling you what to touch and how to touch it. Because actually, it's not so useful to just touch. It's hard to know what it is. And for all these programs, the Warhol Museum worked with the community that would be using these, because I can make a cool tactile and read it and listen to it. But unless you are somebody that actually can't see and can give feedback on that, then it's more shiny tech than it is something useful. So actually, you could see here they're working. This is a visitor, but luckily I got to visit with one of the people that worked on the project, Sina Bahram. It's actually Corey Timpson from the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, which could have been a whole set of slides in and of itself. And he was talking about all of the things that when you actually need to view it as a non-sighted person, that you need guidance in these certain ways, and how you need shadow lifted and that kind of thing. This is the Brillo box from the Andy Warhol Museum, done on a turntable, so you can spin it around and touch it, and you can feel each side, and there are actually differences each side, as Sina pointed out to me, and it's put out here, as you can kind of see in the other photo. It's in a hallway, so it's easily there. It's not only there for tours, it can be experienced by people who can see and cannot see alike, and enjoyed by all. So I think that's a really interesting implementation. And I just had to throw in that actually we tried at the Art Institute. We did a tactile multisensory tour a couple years ago, and we did it with these were with cups that were meant to be touched. We only did it with things that were meant to be touched, and it was also just a very successful. And I use it because, well, it was an exciting project, but also have quotes. This is from a sight-impaired tour participant. When something is described, you're taking someone else's impression, perspective. But if you give me the delicious pastry, then I can make my own decision about what it is. So again, giving opportunity access in different ways and opening it up and allowing each of us to understand more from another perspective. Okay, I'll go through this one quickly too. This is like a totally other kind of use of technology. It was kind of a startup kind of thing that two women in the Washington, D.C. area put together. We had, with the beginning of the Trump administration, there was a lot of, and continue to be, a lot of issues with facts and if facts matter and that kind of thing. So they put together this coalition, which ended up being hundreds of museums and science centers and other kinds of places around the world. It was a social media campaign. One day, back in February 17th, and museums just posted facts. Of course, those, and not politics. Some ended up being like politics, because I guess climate change is political. But so everyone was posting these things so that you had this coalition showing we matter and that we have these kinds of information. Facts are interesting because facts can be mutable, but I think that as a project, it was to get people mobilized and talk. It was really interesting. Just quickly moving on. Nuevo Rushden. I'm not even saying it. Okay, thank you. This is another one that actually, this one came through Twitter. I'd heard from it. The South actually has a lot of immigration, is actually changing a lot from the demographics it has now to a Latino community, and this museum decided to work with the community to start making so it's interactives, videos, getting the stories. Over 3 years in the making, the museum's most ambitious project. Let's see, it's bilingual, interactive exhibit, robust programming, civic dialogue. So the programs were all about dialogue, collaborative art, and online media that explore the surprising ways Latinos are shaping the South, and the South is shaping Latinos. And this is, again, not something that always, especially race and class and ethnicity, don't get dealt with all the time in museums in the U.S. So this is really something that was a great model for us to look at. And so this is some of the videos. And last thing, yes, 2 Holocaust ones, but hey, it was the Holocaust. This is another one that you might have heard about, and it's just so good. The Shoah Foundation actually put this together and is capturing stories from living survivors, because they're aging, and we won't have them around forever. So they're capturing hours and hours of stories, and they're doing it in this setting, this very Hollywood-like setting, so that with a green screen, so then with machine learning and AI, people for generations to come can go and ask a hologram questions and get answers. Seriously? Yeah. Today is the future. Okay, so I'm probably running out of time, but basically I think that the way we need to, how do we activate this? And I think that as technologists, as programmers, we really have to think about what our values are, what do we stand for, what is our approach, how do we as, for those of us who are in digital and are kind of, we like adaptation, that's how we got into technology because it changes all the time. How do we help bring those methodologies and make other people comfortable and learn from other disciplines' methodologies, and so that we can adapt more easily and get the digital literacy. One last comment I will say about this, but to do this, we need to change inside. So we also have to bring the outside in as institutions, change our org chart. This is an org chart from the Oakland Museum of California, which has been known for being able to change, like being visitor-centered and human-centered, and really do innovative programming, is that we cannot exist the way we do now and really fulfill this goal. So I am going to read a little Spanish, because I have to say, I actually studied Spanish. I just didn't practice it for 20 years, so now I don't know. And this quote from Octavio Paz has stayed with me and stuck with me over time, and I think it's actually driven who I am as a person. So I'm going to try and read it. Soy otro cuando soy, los actos míos son más míos si son también de todos. Para que se pueda ser, he de ser de otro. Salir de mí, buscarme entre los otros que no son si yo no existo. Los otros que me dan plena existencia. No soy, no hay yo. Siempre somos nosotros. And we've got to work together to make that happen. Oh, I was going to say, we have a conference coming up, a big one. We have conferences that are, if you could put it on the screen, just 1 second. The PowerPoint, sorry. I didn't want to, wanted to end with the poem. We have a conference that happens it's huge, it's like 4,000 people. It's in Phoenix in May. And I did want to do a shout out we sponsor Museo Punk's podcast. It's in English, so, but they're still awesome, and they talk a lot about these things, like the changing role of museums. So check it out.
Thank you.
And I have stickers.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias. Ya vamos a pasar a la sesión de las preguntas. Pues creo que fue muy enriquecedor, fueron muy enriquecedoras las dos intervenciones. Nos llevan a dejar de pensar en cómo el museo educa a través de objetos, que es algo que también platicábamos ayer con Nancy. Se deja de pensar, digamos, como una institución que educa a través de objetos, de los objetos que resguarda, y más bien como una institución que escucha y que aprende también de sus públicos, de las voces de sus públicos, de las historias que nos cuentan. Y esto creo que implica trabajar en una lógica inversa que viene más, digamos, de afuera hacia adentro de la institución, o quizás en un diálogo más real y más profundo. En este marco de reflexión, la primera pregunta que tengo sería para Nancy. Creo que tu presentación aportó bastante luz sobre el storytelling como una herramienta digital también con la que podemos trabajar con los públicos, ese contar historias, como la aplicación de Be There, Be Here. Be There, sorry. Be Here. Pero hace poco también tú publicaste un artículo en The Museum Review que se llamó Putting the Social in Social Media, Interactive New Media for Museums. Entonces mi pregunta va más en ese sentido de ¿qué piensas sobre el potencial de los museos justo para hacer espacios relevantes, actuar como agentes de cambio, pero a través de las redes sociales? ¿Cómo pueden los departamentos de educación de los museos de todo tipo participar y fomentar una relación más profunda con nuestras audiencias y también con otras instituciones justamente a través de redes sociales y otros medios interactivos?
Yeah, well, I think, social media is one tool among many, and, not all of our audiences use social media, so that's quite important to keep in mind, that when we're trying to connect with a particular community or a particular audience, we need to start with kind of where are they, meet them there, and understand what tools, where are they comfortable speaking and sharing their stories. So for many, it will be on social media, and I think Twitter, actually, two of the largest audiences using Twitter are African American women and English-speaking Latinos in the U.S. So, there certainly are diverse communities on social media platforms, but I guess with social media, as with everything, I would think of it as using it as a tool among many rather than an end in and of itself. One of the common mistakes that I think we see from museums using social media is, and this happens particularly when it kind of is coming from the marketing department, it becomes another broadcast platform. So it's another place to put advertising. And, that's not really what it's actually designed for. So you're kind of only using half the power of the technology if you limit it to one-way communications and aren't using those tools as listening devices as much as they are broadcasting devices.
And, perdón, estaba hablando en inglés, es que tengo las preguntas en inglés. Para ti, Liz, al principio hablabas, digamos, como de esta distinción entre educación formal y no formal, y me gustaría saber, digamos, cuál es tu idea sobre cómo han evolucionado los museos con las plataformas digitales, pero en términos de las herramientas digitales que han generado. ¿Tú piensas que han cambiado las estructuras y esas reglas de las que tú hablabas o los principios pedagógicos, o qué oportunidades o posibilidades ves en eso, como desde un punto de vista más crítico, tú que también tienes una vista, digamos, panorámica desde la American Alliance of Museums?
So much to think about. I think what has changed, or what's evolving, is that a lot of times, from what I know, at least in museums in the United States, a lot of museum education departments, we are really serving the formal, for a long time we were serving the formal education system as a place for field trips, as a place for after school, for tours, and that kind of thing. And I think two things have changed a lot. First of all, money within schools has dried up for busing in and of itself, and that busing doesn't get kids to the museum, or as many kids to museums as it used to. And also, on top of that, all the standards and everything, I mean, I think we're still doing those kinds of things. They're still doing tours. Field trips are still really important. But I think where we see it get a little more interesting and maybe a view of where we could be in the future is when we kind of take more of the informal learning pedagogy and principles, such as what's going on in the makers movement, or starting to think about, well, how can design thinking be part of, in an art museum or any museum, part of the process to aid in critical thinking with all ages, with 4 and 5-year-olds, with everything. So I think that we have the opportunity to experiment with emerging ways of learning, which maybe we're using more in the adult context, more like design thinking. You think that's something that we're using more in corporate settings, so that we can, so that we are drawing in multiple voices, and so how do we like experiment with adapting that for part of, you know, of just your education learning. So I think that that's where, from a critical kind of where that line is that we can start experimenting more, and I see experimenting, especially more with maker spaces, and which we heard about yesterday, and design thinking, and just and visioning with and a couple programs that I've worked on also is just thinking, like looking at how corporations are looking at the world, envisioning the future. Like Google makes a movie about what they want to produce, so that you actually get a sense for how something operates in 3D space in the world, or that you learn how to bring together multiple perspectives, that you use media and storytelling techniques so that you teach kids how to be journalists and things like that. So I think that we have, and we've seen a lot of this, we have the possibility to experiment with techniques and then make the learner part of the process of how that experiment is working and evolving, and how did that work? How can we change that? One of the things at the Art Institute of Chicago that I thought was brilliant was they had a teen council, which would they would evaluate programs that were coming through. They would make programs. They brought together on a weekend the director of the museum and the senior staff, and basically ran a program with them to kind of vision the future, and then ran a contest with visioning the future of the museum. So I think all of these different kinds of ways of activating peers and kids as teachers themselves and as active, I think that's something we also have as a real opportunity.
Muchas gracias, Liz. Bueno, abrimos las preguntas al público. A ver, aquí por favor, la primera.
Para Elizabeth. Mira, Elizabeth, me quedé gratamente sorprendida de tu charla como portavoz de la American Alliance of Museums. Totalmente lejana al discurso pragmático, endogámico, que hizo que muchos nos alejáramos de la asociación. Ahora es una postura realmente filosófica, muy cercana a la museología crítica, con palabras antes impensables para la asociación, que tienen que ver con la teoría postcolonial, equidad, libertad de expresión. Esto no se trataba de ninguna manera antes. Me da mucho gusto y quiero preguntarte cómo se dio este cambio de 180 grados que aplaudo y me congratulo. Y sobre todo que considera que el museo no es un territorio neutral, sino que es un territorio de debate y de equidad, de inclusión y de justicia, que es en lo que nosotros creemos. Esto no sucedía antes en la asociación. Dime cómo dieron este cambio.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's very exciting. Well, I think that we, the organization, we have a CEO right now, Laura Lott, who I think has been there about 2 years, and a very active and vibrant board that was run by Kaywin, who was there for a year ago. And so just, I think that what we've really been looking at transforming as an association, as an organization, getting away from the broadcast of do this, do that, and because also just talking about those kinds of things, or even telling stories, but always telling them in the stories of it's a microcosm of what we're talking about, that everything ended up being a little bit middle of the road. When I did, so I took my job about a year and a half ago, and it was all about developing a new content strategy that allowed for more voices, that allowed us to be more brave as an organization, and that really by doing that, but you also still have to think about all of the different, there's still a lot of variety across the world in the museum world. So you have to be brave, but also do it through the voices of our members. So when I went out and I did a lot of listening, I heard a lot, well, you're really important to the field, but not to me. And so that's one of the things I took to heart when we're developing this content strategy, and that we need to allow people to be, it's an alliance, so allow voices to be in there and be brave and assertive in what we think is the future of museums. So we still have accreditation and rules and standards and share those, but, and we're working on a website right now that will make this a lot more obvious, is allowing more voices to come up so that we can, again, take what Tony was saying about having there are things that just are non-negotiables, and then there are other things of allowing different voices from across the museum field. So instead of just giving statements, so before we would have been asked to make a statement about something, but now when we have something that's happening, like when Charlottesville happened, when we had the white supremacist rally happen in Charlottesville and it turned to violence, that making a statement on that is one thing, but actually finding ways to help the museums there, finding ways to get resources to people to talk about hatred, to talk about where we all come from. So really, we have, through the leadership of Laura Lott, then she hired Rob Stein, who is also from our museum technology field. So also we have also has a very strong opinion, having a strong board, and really knowing that our role has to be for all museums, and we cannot be a middle-of-the-road kind of thing. We have to allow for the voices of all museums and allow that dialogue to happen even at our own level. So it's almost the same thing as what we're saying about museums. We have to live it ourselves as well.
¿Hay otras preguntas aquí, por favor?
Hola, muchas felicidades por sus charlas. Mi pregunta va un poco en el mismo sentido de la de Graciela, y la estoy formulando desde México y desde los programas con los que ha trabajado el MUAC. Esta plataforma que decía Graciela de la museología crítica nos ha hecho cada vez más pensar al museo como un foro de reunión, un foro de debate público y un foro que intenta incidir en la realidad social de nuestra comunidad, en la escala local o en la global. Y en ese sentido se han hecho varios programas. El próximo año va a haber otro congreso más que se va a llamar el Museo Foro. Pero me interesa hacer este recuento brevemente, solo porque estamos claros que ahora la atención está en los públicos, en la posibilidad de traer a mucha gente al museo para hacer cosas. El proyecto de Baltimore apunta para eso. El gran proyecto que está por inaugurarse en Berlín ya no se llama museo, se llama foro, ¿no? El Foro Humboldt o el Humboldt Forum. Y mi pregunta es, con toda la experiencia que tienen desde Museums on the Web y desde la American Alliance of Museums, ¿qué tanto este cambio realmente se está dando a nivel de las estructuras de los museos? Es decir, los directores están abrazando esta nueva orientación. ¿Qué están diciendo los curadores? ¿O qué está pasando con museos de una escala mucho mayor como el Metropolitan, que no necesitan cambiar sus estructuras, ni el Louvre, porque tienen garantizados los públicos? Entonces, un poco tiene que ver con cuánto esto está penetrando realmente las estructuras de gobierno de los museos.
Definitely want to respond. Do you want to speak maybe from the institutional point of view?
Yeah. Well, I think I show, one thing that has come up in a lot of these talks, especially about usually used in response to diversity and inclusion work, is that I think that all of this is slow work, right? And that just because it's slow work doesn't mean that we have to get started. And different places are going to feel it more intensely. So places like the Met, who have probably have a very high percentage of tourist traffic, are not, but they have their own problems, right? But I think that we see like the Oakland Museum of Art, or Oakland Museum of California. I would definitely read that story, because there are these stories of inspiration of directors seeing that there is not a long-term future for their museum unless they do something. And that actually, instead of like contracting or selling art, that that they are looking at how do we really change, so that their story is pretty well known. It goes back a little ways. That org chart is very interesting. And then you kind of look at, and it's also in the flower. I won't mention the name of another museum, but another museum did a flower org chart. But when I read the flower, it's actually director, curatorial, everything else. So whereas this one is about the center. So I think it's slow change, and definitely it depends on leadership. It depends on the situation, like how desperate, how urgent is the situation. But then that's something that we will all learn from. So if we can learn from it sooner rather than later, then that's my.
Yeah, this challenge is precisely one of the reasons why we decided to launch the MuseWeb initiative out of the Museums and the Web conferences, was feeling that we don't have a lot of time, and so the slow change is problematic. I have worked for a number of years inside museums and felt like it would be useful to see what we could do on the margins of museums, so from just outside the institution, working with the communities. And if we start to build up a preponderance of voices and content and initiative that are not started by the museums, they're not controlled by the institutions, that weight might start to shift the whole cultural discourse. Time will tell, but I do think one of the things that we're seeing is even people who would otherwise normally be profiled as likely to go to museums, that is to say, the number one determinant or predictor of whether you're going to go to a museum is whether you have any university level education, post-secondary education. Even those people are not necessarily choosing to spend their time, their leisure time, in museums. And so if we can start working with them and the platforms that they're using and the places that they are outside of museums, will that start to change the institutional approach and methods as well, since that's really the core audience for museums. So there's kind of a two-sided strategy here. And I think one of the keys for me was starting to realize that museums are not just about objects, and this was said yesterday as well, that in fact at least half, if not more, of the value of an object is in the content, the stories that grow up around it. And they deserve as much care in the preservation and the transmission as the object itself. So if we start with those stories and the voices that tell them and the people that they're relevant to, that is really a radical new approach to the very core concept of museums, which is what is the collection. So that's where I'm kind of interested in looking at this critical museology, as you were talking about, going forward.
¿Hay más preguntas? Aquí arriba.
Esta es una pregunta para Nancy. Y continúa un poco en la línea de la pregunta de Luis. En todo el tiempo que has estado trabajando en MuseWeb, ¿cómo has sentido que el público es el que exige estos cambios? El que exige que a lo mejor un museo tenga desde una página web y que tenga los contenidos que uno necesita para poder acceder a ciertas cosas, o sea, desde ¿Dónde está? ¿Cuál es el horario? ¿Cuál es todo esto? ¿Y cuáles han sido los mayores cambios que tú has visto dentro de los museos, de la gente que trabaja dentro de los museos? ¿Cuál ha sido como su actitud respecto a estos cambios? Creo que aquí yo voy a hablar como desde la experiencia. Una cosa que cambió mucho la forma de ver los museos en México fue el Museo del Niño, que fue un museo que proponía ver, tocar, oír, todo. Y eso cambió mucho la forma en que los niños se relacionaban con los museos, porque ahora iban a cualquier otro museo y querían tocar. Entonces, los otros museos tuvieron que adaptarse a esos pequeños cambios, y no es que el museo quiera hacer el cambio, es que el visitante le está exigiendo ese cambio al museo. Entonces, en términos de tecnología, ¿cuáles han sido como los mayores cambios que ha habido dentro de los museos exigidos por los mismos visitantes?
That's a really good question. I think probably it all goes back to the increasing availability of low-cost tools for self-publishing. And so maybe some of the first, and please chime in and help me out here, Liz, some of the first things that we started seeing, of course, were, comment sections. There were blogs and then there were comments. And, then there started being, obviously, the social media platforms and the means for audiences to create content and to speak in response to what the museum was doing. And, I don't know, my experience working inside museums was you could have 100 positive comments and one bad one, and the whole ship would mobilize to deal with the crisis of this one negative comment. So those voices are indeed really powerful. I think what we probably need to see more of is digital literacy among those who create the programs and the exhibitions of the museum, so that in thinking about the development of an exhibition, for example, a curator doesn't just start with their own idea or something that's kind of getting a lot of play in their curatorial circles among their peers, but to start to say, well, whom do I want to reach? And then spend some time listening, and then figure out, okay, what are the themes and therefore the objects and what's the curatorial thesis that I can bring to this conversation that's going to be meaningful to that target audience. I think, most of the time it's very top-down, so it starts with a subject matter expert who conceives of an idea. They say, these are the objects that are going to help me tell that story. They mount them, and kind of the content, the education, the interpretation comes very late in the process. It's a sort of a build it and they will come method. But if you invert that process and you start with, well, whom do I want to reach? Where are they? What technologies do they use? What stories are important to them? And how can I mine the collection of my museum and my own knowledge to respond to that? Then you've got audience and relevance baked in from the beginning. So it's a very grassroots up sort of approach. And again, back to your point, social media is an incredibly powerful tool in helping us listen and helping us learn and helping us really create kind of data landscapes of what is important to the audiences that we're trying to reach.
Can I add one thing? Because I also think that as long as they're demanding things, they still care. Phew. So we have to, take that as a really great thing, that they're demanding things of us, and that then how do we act on those things? And so you talked about the making of an exhibition, but that was a great example about the Children's Museum. Then they want to touch. We just did Dana Mitroff-Silvers, who's a design thinking facilitator. She ran an improv at MCN so that we could learn how to use within our corporations the yes and. So instead of someone says, oh, they were at the Children's Museum, now they touch things. Oh no. Instead of saying, well, yes, and? Well, how can we use this within our own? Because maybe we need something that people need to touch, How do we actually engage in what that need is? So how does it become an opportunity, that demand become an opportunity that then we can riff on whatever museum type we are and take advantage of that insight? So I think really thinking about those demands as just critical and exciting places to grow from could be really exciting. Like changing opening hours. I really wish every museum would change, because then I could go. So it's, listen and then act. So.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias, de verdad, a todos y... Vamos a un break y regresamos, por favor.
Son 15 minutos, hay coffee break afuera, pásenla bien, pero